Does everybody have a copy of the overview of Libertas? And everybody have a copy of Libertas as well? Now, this question is honestly a little difficult to disentangle. It's actually in itself pretty clear, but it is nevertheless difficult to disentangle. There are basically, again, there's a Catholic view of liberty and there's a Masonic view of liberty. The Masonic view of liberty is definitely Thomas Jefferson, and the general American view of liberty is liberal, Jeffersonian, and it isn't Catholic. It's a view which is not so much thought, because the moment you stop and think, you can see that it's wrong. But it's a view that's felt. I feel that liberty is wonderful, it's an ideal, and anybody who puts up any constraint upon me is limiting me and limiting my humanity and cutting me down as a man, and I need to be free. That's a feeling, really. It's not an argument, it's a feeling. And it's centered on man. If man is an end in himself, then, you know, then it's right that he should be able to do anything he wants. But if man has an end outside of himself, then what he should and shouldn't do depends upon that end. If I do something which is going to wreck my reaching that end, I better not do it. I better not be free to do it. I better be free only for those things that are going to help me to get that end. So the two views of liberty, the Masonic view of liberty and the Catholic view of liberty, once more come back down to, is man the end of himself, the purpose, the goal, the end of himself? In that case, you have one view of liberty. Or is God the end of man? And in that case, you have another view of liberty. So the question of liberty, you are only going to sort out if you sort out, firstly, whether man is his own end. If you believe that man is his own end, there's no way that you're going to buy the Catholic view of liberty. If man is his own end, there's no limit at all upon what you should be able to do. On the other hand, if God is man's end, if man has an end outside himself, if he's in this life only in order to go to God, then the liberty that man has is aiming at God. In that case, the liberty should be free to do everything that will take him to God, but should not be free for anything that will take him away from God. Let's take an example. See if I can do it with a comparison. We'll come to this in a few moments, but let's take a 747, one of those that just crashed last night. A 747. Here's the 747, big plane, wings, nose, tail, and so on. I'm not really an artist, is that a fish? I'm not really an artist. That's a 747. Now, you look at a 747 and you say to yourself, is the 747 an end in itself, or is its end flying across the Atlantic? Is its end flying? If it's an end in itself, does it ever need to take off? If it's an end in itself, does it ever need to take off? Could you happily burn it on the airport if it's an end in itself? Could you put it on a stand? Could you gold plate it? Could you cover it with moss? If it's an end in itself, you could do absolutely anything with it, correct? If it's its own end. On the other hand, if its end is outside itself, if its end is outside itself, namely flying, then what follows? That in order to achieve its end, it's got to have, the end is going to govern what is good and what is not good for it. If it is its own measure of its end, then it can do what it likes, but it'll never take off. For instance, if I cover it with moss, it's never going to take off. Or if I gold-plate it, it may not take off. Or if I take off 2 of the engine pods, it'll never take off. If it's an end in itself, I can do all kinds of things with it, but it's not going to be able to take off with easily most of the things that I do. On the other hand, if its end is outside it, then what is good or not good is going to be governed by that end. And for this elephant to fly, it's got to obey a very large number of rules, right? In other words, in order to be free to fly, it's got to do without a whole lot of other freedoms. In order to achieve the freedom to fly, in order to achieve its end, it's got to do without all kinds. The pilot sits down in the cockpit at the beginning of a flight, and he goes all over the panels. He's checking one thing after another, after another, after another. And if one light shows wrong, he says, sorry folks, we're going to have to wait a moment until the airport engineers come and replace this piece. I do hope you won't be too... thank you for your cooperation. The usual spiel. If the airplane wants to be free to fly, if its end is outside itself, then it's got to obey what that end requires. And that end, flying safely over the Atlantic, requires a stack of rules to be obeyed. And there's all kinds of things that the 747 is no longer free to do if it wants to achieve its end. Now, if its end is itself, it need never take off. In that case, you can do what you like with it. You can make it a little castle. You can build sand castles all over it. You can put the local shopping mall in it. You can do anything you like with it, as long as it is sacred in itself. If it's sacred in itself, you can do anything you like, but it's not going to take off. But if its end is to take off, then there's not anything you can do with it. You've got a very, very strict parameters within which to work. So, the liberty to fly means a great deal of constraint. And if you insist upon liberty for the 747 in itself, it's not going to have liberty to fly. So is the 747 to fly or not? If it is, it's going to be very, very strictly controlled in order to fly. If it isn't to fly, you can do what you like with it. You can go and take some aluminum pieces off and put them on the garden shed. You can drape lead all over the tail. You can give the whole plane a lead coating to keep it from blowing away. There's 1,000 things you can do with it. So the whole question, the question of what is liberty for the 747 is determined by, is the 747 an end in itself, or is the 747 end outside it? That's the question. If it's an end in itself, then it doesn't need to fly, and you can do anything you like, absolutely anything you like. If its end is outside it, in order to do that flying, it's going to have to obey a lot of very strict rules. And if you arrive at the airport, and somebody says to you, this 747 that you're about to climb into has got liberty. Oh? It's got liberty from all of the rules of aeronautics. Oh? We have declared independence from having to obey the rules of flying. Oh? Are you proposing to take off in that? Oh, yes. Well, thanks very much. I'll go and find an aeroplane that's strictly doing without all kinds of liberty because I want to get in one piece over the other side of the Atlantic. The purpose, is the 747 a purpose in itself, or is it purpose outside it? Now you take man. You take man now. He sort of stands this way. Is man's end outside him, or is man an end in himself? According to According to whether man is an end in himself or man's end is outside him, you've got two very different ideas of liberty. If man is an end in himself, he can do what he likes, and that's what the Freemasons say. Anything, absolutely anything he likes. On the other hand, if man's end is outside him, then man has got, like the 747, he's got to obey certain rules in order to fly to that end, to get to that end. So what is the nature of man? Now, what do most men today feel about man? Do men today feel that their end is outside them, or do men today feel that man is the end, purpose, and glory of creation? Stephen?
Himself.
Yes. And that's why you get the modern view of liberty. See, Thomas Jefferson arrives 200 years after Protestantism. And Protestantism has been fighting Catholicism, and so people say, I don't know what the truth is. Why in the 10,000 years of, in the 1,000 years of Christendom, everybody knew that man's end was outside him, because everybody agreed, the Catholic Church, nobody was seriously arguing with the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church taught that the purpose of man is only to live in this valley of tears in order to go to heaven, and that when he dies, he's got to fly to heaven. In other words, when he dies, the plane has got to be in shape to take off for heaven, otherwise he's going to crash into hell. So this life is simply a preparation for that moment of death when we're going to take off, and the plane had better be in good shape, just like the 747 always has to be in good shape as they rev up the engines to take off. It has to be, otherwise it's going to crash. So as long as the Catholic Church was teaching that, there was no problem. But when the Protestants came along and started arguing with that, after 200 years of the Catholic Church being disputed, Thomas Jefferson comes along and says, I don't know. Hey, the priests and the ministers themselves don't know. They're all arguing with one another. Who knows what the truth is? There isn't a truth. Who knows what the truth is? Can we get to the truth? But what I do know is that, I'm a man and I'm valuable. So to blazes with this idea of any end outside, we'd better settle for making an end out of ourselves. So if I knew, but Thomas Jefferson might have said, if I knew that I had to take off for heaven when I died, and that there were certain rules for being in shape in order to take off when I die, well, I'm sure I'd settle for those rules, but I don't know that. The churchmen themselves are arguing about it. So in the meantime, what I do know is that I have a life to live here on this earth, and I'm going to make it as comfortable as I can. So in order to make it comfortable, what we'll do is we'll give freedom for everybody to express their opinion. There isn't a truth, so the best thing we can do is let everybody say what they think. And that's Jeffersonian freedom of the press. And it follows, if there's no true religion, or if people can't get to the true religion, if people can't find out what man really is for, if it's unknowable what man is for, then Jeffersonian liberty is the next best. Hey guys, at least I'm here, and I don't know about any other end, but I'm an end of some kind, so we'll settle for me being an end. So look, let's make this life as comfortable as we can, and give as much liberty to as many people as we can, because why should we limit it? And that's the modern system. We don't know about God, we don't know about the end, we do know about man. Man is a fairly glorious creature, he's naughty all the time, but let's make things as free and nice for man as we can on this earth and in this life, and that's modern liberty. The Catholics say, no way, Jose. The Catholics say, look, God took flesh once, only once. He founded a church. That church has taught us absolutely clear, uncontestable rules. Any man who wants to know this truth can know it. God could not have made this truth inaccessible for anybody who wanted to get to it. For anybody who wants to get to it, it is there, it is reachable, it is knowable. That truth is as clear can be. We have got to be in shape for the moment of takeoff, and we've got to obey the 10 Commandments, and this is exactly what we have to do. These are all the cockpit rules that we have to obey if we want to get to heaven. If we want to be free to fly in the fields of paradise for eternity, if we want the real freedom, we'd better limit our freedom in this life. Jefferson says, I don't know about any pie in the sky, about any paradise, about any possibility later. If you want to believe in that, that's fine by you, but I don't know about it, and Joe doesn't know about it. So look, let's just organize society so that everybody can do what they like. And that's modern liberty. So the question of liberty is essentially a secondary question. The first question is, what is man? Does God? The first question is always, does God exist? That's always the first question. Second question, has God told us what we need to do by the time we die? If he exists and he hasn't told us, then we can do what we like. But if he exists and if he has told us, we'd better do it if we want to go to heaven. He's left us the liberty to go to hell if we want. But if you want to go to heaven, then it's clear what we have to do. And I'm not at liberty to go to hell if I do everything that will prepare me to go to heaven, and I'm not at liberty to go to heaven if I do everything to prepare me to go to hell. In other words, I can choose which way I want, but I can't choose that that will lead here or that that will lead here. If between this and this, if I choose this, it's going to lead there, and if I choose that, it's going to lead there. In other words, the geography I can't change. I'm not at liberty to change the geography. Which way I go in the geography, I'm at liberty. But the basic ground plan is not under my control. It's God who's laid it all down. So there's Jefferson. And Jefferson, compared with the modern liberty merchants, is an angel. The modern liberty merchants is, I am God, make no mistake. Jefferson was still, you say, I'm not sure, you know, I mean, I really don't know, so let's look after number one. But the moderns are, I am number one. Of course, Jefferson is not far from that, but I think you can say he's not yet there. And in that sense, he's a bit of an angel compared with those who have got there. All right, now let's have a look at this plan, which I think, again, will help us. Liberty, I say it's basically a secondary question. And it depends upon who you think man is, who you think, or whether you think God is, and what man is here for. Those are the primary questions. And liberty simply follows on those questions. In any case, what is liberty? Liberty is the absence of constraint. The lack of anything forcing me to do X or Y or Z. It divides into, firstly, the physical liberty and natural liberty. Physical liberty is the absence of external constraint. For instance, a cage, e.g. cage, or prison, chains, cage, chains. For instance, a bird. If a bird is not in a cage, and if there's no thread tied to a bird's foot, then a bird has physical liberty, because it's not being externally constrained. You and I have physical liberty because none of us are wearing handcuffs, none of us are in prison, there are no locked doors, there's no force of any kind being of external material, physical force. Therefore, all of us here obviously have, right here and now, physical liberty. If any of us was thrown into prison, we would no longer have physical liberty. If any of us was put in handcuffs, we would no longer have physical liberty. So physical liberty is a very simple affair. It's not difficult to understand. Right. It's different from natural liberty, which is the absence of internal constraint. For instance, instincts. And natural liberty is the same thing as free will. Now, the bird, if it's not in a cage, has got physical liberty. But no bird has got free will, because no bird is free from internal constraint. Every bird, like every other animal, is constrained by its instincts. Every bird is limited and controlled by its instincts. Every dog is limited and controlled by its instincts. Every horse is limited and controlled by its instincts. The horse, if it's out in the meadow and is free, or is out on the plain, it's got physical liberty. But it hasn't got natural liberty, because the horse will always do exactly what its instincts tell it. You see a dog coming up to the edge of a cold stream, and on the other side there's a plate of red meat. You can see the dog coming up and then going back. Coming up because of the red meat, going back because of the cold water. The two instincts are fighting one another. Do you think the dog has free will to choose between which of those instincts will prevail? No, it doesn't. The instincts fight one another, but that's not free will. Because in the end, whichever instinct is stronger, the coldness of the water or the lusciousness of the red meat, one of those instincts will prevail over the other, and either the dog will swim across the water and get the meat, or it will walk away. But it's just a battle of instincts. It's not free will. Because the dog is controlled by its instincts, the instincts simply fight one another until one prevails. But a human being who's not drunk and who's not asleep and who's reached the age of reason, he has got free will. He's got a faculty which can override his instincts and determine which way the instincts go, whether to go with this instinct or whether to go with that instinct. The human being is the human being who's got reason is not constrained internally. If he's not constrained externally, he may not be constrained internally either. And it's implanted in man's nature. It's in man's nature. Man is a rational animal, therefore it's in man's nature to have free will. It's in the birds and the animals' nature not to have free will. It's in man's nature, because he has reason, to have free will. The Freemasons absolutely confuse that. Because the Freemasons want us all to believe that we're animals, or we're no better and no different from animals, because if we're no better and no different from animals, we will behave like animals. If we will behave like animals, then they can herd us all over the place like animals, which is what they want. The sheep of the Antichrist, that's what they want. So the Masons blur this all the time. You keep seeing television programs about how the animals are just like human beings. For instance, we're shown a picture of an aquarium in Florida, and somebody in a white coat, a scientist in a white coat with big spectacles, comes on and says, "Folks, today we're going to listen to a conversation between Mr. Dolphin and Mrs. Dolphin. We've got tremendous listening equipment, and they've got computers all over the place, and dials and buzzes and flashing lights. And the cameras on all of this, and it all looks very, very serious. And so, okay, now folks, we're going to listen." Do you know, that was Mr. Dolphin talking to Mrs. Dolphin, and Mr. Dolphin was saying, "Good morning." That was Mrs. Dolphin talking to Mr. Dolphin, and Mrs. Dolphin saying, "Get lost." You get television programs on this level. They are the levels. There is no way that the dolphins can talk like human beings or indulge in the exchange of reason between. There's nothing of the kind. Of course, animals make noises to one another, expressing their instincts, but that's totally different from the conversation between two human beings with reason. Totally different. But the Freemasons and the television are constantly pretending that there's no real difference. And they take the most reasonable looking behavior of animals in order to try to prove that the animals have got reason, or that they take the most beastly behavior of human beings in order to prove that human beings haven't got reason. In any case, the Freemasons do everything to try to knock out that line, to knock out the difference between living beings that are internally constrained and living beings that are not internally constrained. But so this is physical liberty and this is free will, and the two things are quite different. It's common sense that they're quite different. The bird out in the fields has got physical liberty, it hasn't got free will. The bird in the cage has got no physical liberty and it's got no free will. The human being in a cage has still got free will, but he's lost his physical liberty. The human being out in the fields has got both free will and physical liberty. So you can find something which has got this and not that and not this, neither that nor this, both that and this. The two liberties are quite clearly very different. Okay, so the absence of internal constraint, for instance by instinct. Sometimes men's instincts can get very, very strong. In France, they've got, if a man kills his wife, there is a defense of, I forget what they call it, crime passionnel, I think. The instinct was just too strong, and therefore it, the guilt is diminished if he murders his wife, you know. But if he did it out of just a wild passion, because as the passion gets absolutely wild, so the reason is diminished. Catholic theology considers that. But still, you know, it's not. Catholic theology examines how far, if at all, free will is taken away in men by instincts. For instance, fear. Is a man responsible if somebody puts a gun to his head and he signs his name? And Catholic theology says, yes, he is still responsible. Obviously, it diminishes his, but I don't, if somebody puts a gun to my head, I do not have to a right to sign, to give a signature which is a mortal sin. And I'm not excused from mortal sin. Obviously, I'm partly excused, but I'm still responsible if even with a gun. So, the question of instincts and passions against free will is considered by a moral theology, but human beings are quite different from animals. So that's the difference between free will and physical liberty. Now, so that's the difference between 1 and 2. We want now natural liberty is like the Boeing 747 doing whatever it wants. Let's say you can cover it with moss, you can give it a coating of lead, you can strip the aluminum, you can make it into a shopping mall. Natural liberty means man's faculty to use his free will for anything he wants, absolutely anything he wants. That's natural liberty is wide open. It's just the faculty of free will. But now natural liberty divides. Natural liberty, the birds don't get into questions of morality because they've got no reason. The only creatures that get into questions of morality are creatures that have got reason. Therefore, the question of when I've got reason, which is free will, which goes with free will, or which free will goes with, when I've got a being that has reason, we're stepping into the domain of morality. I can make a good use of my free will, or I can make an evil use of my free will. If I make a good use of my free will, that's what we call moral liberty. If I make a bad use of my free will, that is what we might call immoral liberty or license. If I choose sin, then that's license or licentiousness. If I choose anything virtuous, that's moral liberty. Now, for man to go to his end, which is God, man will need moral liberty. He will need to exercise his moral liberty. If man has an end outside himself, if that end is God, and if God requires that I do what is morally good in order to reach him, then a man has got moral liberty. That man must use his moral liberty to do what's good and to attain his end. And if he has an end and refuses to do what's good, he will be punished for it. On the other hand, if man is an end in himself, then which liberty counts? If man is an end in himself, is there any difference between moral liberty and license? If man is his own end? David?
No, there's no difference.
There's no difference. Because there's no end, there's nobody out here telling me what's good or evil. I can do whatever I like. So the liberty of the man who's an end in himself is natural liberty. There's no difference between, if you suppress God, who as the end of man, who distinguishes between good and evil, and who tells me to do good and not to do evil, if you suppress all of that, then this just gets wiped out. There's no difference here. The difference between moral liberty and license is the difference between good and evil. If the difference between good and evil is wiped out, then all that you've got left is natural liberty. So, if the Freemasons deny the existence of God, or deny the importance of God, if they deny that there's a difference between good and evil, then the only liberty that's left is natural liberty, and I can do what I like. I have natural liberty and I can use it how I like. On the other hand, if man has an end outside himself, if he must do what is good in order to achieve that end, then he must make the right use of his natural liberty, which means he must confine his choices to moral liberty. He can choose between one good thing and another. He can choose between all of the good things, but he can't choose between what's evil, because that will take him away from God, and that means that he will crash. He will crash when it comes to taking off from the airport. Let us have a look now at Leo XIII. Because the word liberty has got these three meanings: physical liberty, natural liberty, and moral liberty. And you need to be clearly distinguished between the three. The grandeur of liberty. Liberty, man's highest natural gift. What do you think that is? Which liberty do you think that is? Tony? Right. Free will, exactly. Free will, man's highest natural gift, is assisted by the Redeemer. Assisted by the Redeemer in order to become moral liberty, right? The Redeemer helps us make the right use of our natural liberty in order that we use it in a moral liberty, choosing only what's good. Natural liberty, man's highest natural gift, is assisted by the Redeemer and is cherished by the Church. The Church defends free will. Why does the Church do? Who attacks free will? Calvin, right. The Protestants are liable to deny that free will exists. Who else denies that free will exists in modern times?
Modern psychology.
Yes, definitely. Modern psychology denies free will. It says that we are the victims of our environment and or our instincts. Freud, we are pushed around by the id and the ego and whatever it is, and we don't have free will. Modern psychology tells us that we don't have free will. What's the advantage of not having free will?
Accountability.
Accountability. I don't have to answer to anybody for what I do. If I don't have free will, I can go down to the bar every night and enjoy myself.
It's society's fault.
It's society's fault, that's right. So people like not having free will, which is why every now and again you get somebody who tells us that we don't have free will, but we do. So the Church, on the other hand, defends free will against the liars that say we don't have it. So free will is assisted by the Redeemer and it's cherished by the Church. But vitiated or false modern notions of liberty require from us a special encyclical. In what does the essential modern error about liberty consist? After all that I've said, in what does the essential, Doctor? That there's no difference between good and evil. That there's no God, that there's no end outside man, and that there's no good and evil laid down. There's nothing outside of man which is the measure of his actions and which imposes upon him to do what's good and not to do what's evil. That's what is the heart of the modern idea of liberty. Man is his own God. Man is his own measure of what's right and wrong. That's what people think today. And if the people decide that abortion is okay, and if the people makes a law, if we the people make a law that abortion is okay, hey, then abortion is okay. Right. All right. Notice then, 3 to 13, he lays out true liberty. 15 to 35, he lays out false liberty. Now, often we see in these encyclicals, you will notice, if you notice the way they're laid out, quite often the error is first laid out and then the truth is laid out afterwards. In this one, he lays out the truth first and then lays out the error afterwards. Why does anybody think he lays out the truth first this time?
Probably because you have to establish it, to understand it like you just did.
It's a difficult question. There's much confusion, and so he lays out the truth before going into the errors. That's surely why he has to lay out that it's so confusing. It's so confusing. And Vatican II put out a document which is swimming in that confusion, called Dignitatis Humanae, on religious liberty. And it's the same basic confusion. If man is God or God is God, that's the basic question. And people today think that man is God, and so Vatican II said, in order to adapt to the modern mentality, the church must adapt the man is God view of liberty. The church must take over and make her own the man is God idea of liberty. In other words, natural liberty is the same thing as moral liberty. Moral liberty and license just disappear into natural liberty, and man has a right to do anything he likes. It's insane, but that really is what the Vatican II ultimately teaches. Right, now, you can see 3-4, he goes into natural liberty, and then 5 to 13, he goes into moral liberty, and that's exactly this distinction, natural liberty, moral liberty. And firstly 3-4, natural, or it's sometimes called psychological liberty. That's another name for it, but it's exactly the same thing. Meaning free will, which is the base of all liberties. Because if man doesn't have this faculty, then there's no way in which he can use or apply whatever, there's no, without, this is the fundamental faculty, without which there's no other possibility of any freedom of choice on the part of men. Therefore, he's saying this is the fundamental, the base of all liberties is based on man's rational nature. It's because man has reason that he has free will. That's a very interesting question. But to listen to the Masons, free will is the glory and characteristic of men. To listen to the Catholics, reason is the glory and characteristic of men. And from reason follows free will. I wish we had time to go into it, because it is a very interesting question, because it already puts a lot of ideas straight, to realize that liberty is not the be-all and end-all of man. Liberty is simply a spin-off from man's having reason. It's creatures of reason that all have liberty. No creature can have liberty unless it has reason. Every creature that has reason has liberty. Liberty is secondary once more. What's primary is reason. But of course, why do the Freemasons say that liberty, why do the Freemasons put liberty above reason? Because if man has reason, you might immediately think, well, in that case, man ought to do what is reasonable. Exactly, you see. The moment you start talking about things being reasonable or unreasonable, you're immediately suggesting that there's something outside of man controlling him. And the Masons don't want that. I am king. Man is king. Therefore, they don't start from reason. They start from liberty. I am liberty. And that is their basic principle, and everything else they make follow from that, because they want to make man into God. So, and modern men feel that they are God. And so the poor old Catholic Church, the churchmen of Vatican II, facing modern man, who feels that he's God, instead of saying, hey, you guys, you got it completely wrong, go jump in the lake. Instead of telling modern man where to get off, the modern church said, oh, modern man, you're wonderful. So we'll all now, too, adopt the idea that man is God and that liberty is the basis of everything. And the first two words of that document are dignitatis humani, of human dignity. See? And if you start out from human dignity, well, then, of course, man is going to be the measure of everything. But if you start out from divine dignitatis, of divine dignity, then God is going to be the measure. In that case, man is going to have to make the right use of his liberty. Man is going to have somebody outside him telling him what he has to do, and man will have to obey. Oh, the Masons don't want that. So, 4. Free will is based on man's rational nature, and not reason based on liberty, but liberty is based on reason. The immortal soul's natural liberty, or free will, the Church has defended against all comers. So there we are. Natural liberty is that faculty of free will built into every reasonable nature, built therefore into man's nature, which is the basis of all other liberties, and without which any other liberty is inconceivable. So that's like the raw material. That is this material, raw material liberty, just glorious, or is it glorious and dangerous? Is this faculty of free will for man, such as we Catholics know man to be, is it glorious, just glorious, or is it glorious and dangerous? David? For the Masons, what is it? Just glorious, that's it. You're getting the idea. For the Masons, this faculty is just glorious because man can use it how he likes. But for the Catholics, this faculty is glorious, but it's also dangerous. Because this life is full of tears and it's also full of dangers, and many men go to hell. They make the wrong use of the faculty, and therefore they finish up in hell. That there are many, many temptations. The world, the flesh, and the devil push us to make the wrong use of this glorious faculty. And if we make the wrong use of the glorious faculty, then we get a glorious punishment, which lasts for eternity, down below. All right, now let's look at moral liberty.
But it is bright and all that up.
It's all, yeah, no central heating bills down there. That's true. Now, he lays out 5 to 11 the doctrine, and then 12 to 13 what the church. What he's going to teach about moral liberty is quite simple. Basically what he's going to say is that, he's going to say, man has an end. In order to achieve that end, he's got to obey certain rules, just like the 747, in order to be able to fly across the Atlantic, has got to obey certain rules. And in fact, the liberty to fly requires rules. So man has an end. The liberty to achieve that end requires rules. If you want to fly a 747, you've got to take care of avoiding a whole lot of things. For instance, hammerhead clouds. You know those? The hammerhead clouds are very dangerous apparently because there's a powerful upcurrent. It can throw planes all over the place. So if you want to fly safely, you've got to avoid hammerhead clouds. There's all kinds of rules that you have to obey. Rules of aeronautics, rules of weather. That's simply what he's saying here. Man, in fact, has to cross the Atlantic. Man has a maker, man has a creator who's created him for heaven. He has an end outside himself. To achieve that end, he's got to obey certain rules. Therefore, in order to be free to achieve that end, for his real liberty, he needs rules. It sounds funny to say that liberty needs rules, but what it means is that moral liberty is the purpose of natural liberty. And in order to get from natural liberty to moral liberty, I need some rules to guide me in order to make sure that I arrive at moral liberty, to keep me away from using natural liberty for license. So, it's a little technically laid out, but what he's arguing is that liberty is a faculty of beings that can choose by intelligence and will. In other words, you find liberty, 5, you find liberty where you have reason. Now, 6, erring human intelligence and wayward will, because men are naughty. They have errors in their heads and they have naughtiness in their hearts. Men, erring human beings, can easily wreck their choice. The 747 can easily hit the wrong kind of cloud or be mechanically unprepared. And therefore, before you take off, you need a checklist where you've got to check every piece of equipment on the 747 to make sure that the slats are working, to make sure that the ailerons are working, to make sure that the fin is working, to make sure the landing gear is working. You've got to check every one of those things before you take off. You need a whole lot of rules if the plane is going to be free to fly. If the plane doesn't have to fly, you can do what you like. But if the plane does have to fly, you have to obey a stack of rules. So, erring human intelligence away we will can wreck their choice, and therefore the conclusion of 5 and 6 is that human liberty, in order to avoid a wreck, requires direction. In order for the faculty to achieve what it's meant to achieve, it must be guided away by rules from achieving what it's not meant to achieve. It needs rules to bring it to its purpose, assuming that there is a purpose. If there isn't a purpose, then that's all wiped out, and all we have is this, and we can do what we like. Right? Then, in the individual, that's the main argument. 5, 6, 7 is the main argument of the whole of the encyclical. The center of gravity is 5, 6, 7, you could say. 8, 9 is he's simply spelling out what kind of law we're talking about. Human liberty requires law. This wide open faculty needs guide rails to make sure that it gets to its end. Otherwise, it's going to make a wreck. So we all of us need rules to get us to our end. We need the 10 Commandments, notably. If we obey the 10 Commandments, we will go to heaven. If we don't obey the 10 Commandments, we will go to hell. So we need those 10 Commandments. We need rules to make sure that we achieve the purpose of our glorious but dangerous faculty. Otherwise, that dangerous faculty risks hitting the danger and blowing up. Right. In the individual, there's natural law, which is the implant of God's eternal law, which is held by God's grace. That's in the individual. In society, there is human law, which is enacting or supporting God's eternal law. So, therefore, true human liberty lies in conforming with God's eternal law. So, what he's saying there is 5, 6, 7. The natural faculty requires law in order to fly across the Atlantic, get to heaven. 8, 9, that law is in any case, whether it's individual or social, in any case, it's God's law. The conclusion then is natural liberty, in order to achieve its purpose, requires God's law. Now you go to Thomas Jefferson and tell him liberty requires the law of God. Imagine, what do you think Thomas Jefferson would have said? He would have blown a raspberry. You telling me that my liberty requires law from God? I am the judge of God's law. If I think that the 10 Commandments are going to make me happy, fine. I will choose to obey God's law. That's Jefferson. But if I think that the 10 Commandments are not going to make me happy, I'm not going to choose them. And I have a right. That's Jefferson. And Jefferson is ultimately, man is God and not God is God. That's the bottom line. So, in the individual, if we're talking about law in the individual, it's an implant of God's law. If we're talking about law in society, it's the human law which is enacting or supporting God's natural law, and therefore, in any case, 10, true human liberty. True human liberty. The liberty to fly across the Atlantic requires rules. Man's true liberty is not the liberty to sit on the airport and get covered with lead or moss. Man's true liberty is the liberty to get to heaven. That liberty to get to heaven requires laws, and it requires God's law. And therefore you arrive at this strange-looking conclusion that liberty needs law. So, because God's authority, 11, the authority of God perfects and guides human liberty to the good which is its perfection. In other words, again, law, God's law, guides the glorious but dangerous faculty to achieve its purpose. The cockpit rules guide the 747 to fly over the Atlantic. The cockpit checklist enables the 747 to fly. The law of God enables man to fly to heaven. Otherwise he's going to crash into hell. Then briefly about the church. The church is the defender of liberty, 12, and the church is the protector of the people. The Masons, through the 19th century, were terrible. They were liars. They lie, they lie, they lie. They are the Freemasons are the father of this world of lies that we've got today. Of course, the real father is Satan, but the Masons are the instruments of Satan to make this world of lies which we've got all around us today. The Masons lie, and through the 19th century they lied that the church is against liberty. The church is against saying that natural liberty is the final liberty, yes, but the church is for the faculty of liberty because that is the basis of moral liberty, which is the means for man to get to heaven, which is his purpose and his eternal happiness. Therefore, the church is not against natural liberty, but the church is against making natural liberty into the only liberty. That's what the church is against. But the Masons say the church is against natural liberty. The church is against liberty. We defend liberty, the church is against liberty. See? And poor dumb modern men, you see, the moment you say liberty, most modern men, you know, it's like saying democracy. Ah! Liberty. Ah! Fascism. Ooh! Yeah. People today don't think, they just have push-button minds. You push the right buttons and they all get gooey and feel good. You push the wrong buttons and they all start hissing and spitting. That's the way modern minds work. Sorry?
There is evil, fascism,
Well,
burning a black shirt.
Yes, interesting. Yes, that's true. That's true. You could sort of say, I mean, we must use natural liberty in order to be liberals and not in order to be fascists. Yes, there is. Yes. Yes, that's true. We're at liberty for everybody except for fascists. Except for fascists, colonialists, sexists, racialists. You know, yes, it's a new morality, a completely new morality. So, yes. God's authority perfects and guides human liberty to the good which is the perfection of human liberty. That good, the landing in Europe is the perfection of the 747. Arriving at heaven is the perfection of all of man's faculties, of man's nature. So the law of God will help us to fulfill our nature. You try telling a Freemason that the law of God will help us to fulfill our nature. For a Freemason, the law of God is exactly the opposite of what helps us to fulfill our nature. For the Freemason, what we need in order to fulfill our nature is complete and perfect natural liberty. That's what they say. So, the Catholic Church has always been the incomparable defender of the right understanding of liberty. Because by tying authority to God, she ennobles true obedience and effectually bars tyranny. Notice that paragraph 13. By tying authority to God, by, for instance, the anointing of kings, when the Catholic Church ties authority to God, saying that all authority comes from God, what that naturally means is the people must obey. Therefore, she ennobles true obedience and she effectually bars tyranny. But if the king is tied to God, then the king has got to behave himself, as well as the people obeying. But by making authority a divine thing and not just a human thing, the church stops the king from oppressing the people and stops the people from revolting against the king. And if the king behaves himself, the people won't want to revolt. And if the people behave themselves, the king won't need to be cruel. So in a Catholic society, you get harmony from top to bottom because everybody is lined up on God. But if you take away God, then men do what they like. And if the aristocrats forget God, the middle class will get rid of them. And if the middle class put God back, the people will respect the middle class. But if the middle class don't put God back, if the middle class simply take all the privileges in order to enjoy themselves like fat cats, then the socialists will rise up against the middle class. And if the socialists then behave like idiots and barbarians, the Unabomber will rise up against the socialists and will send them bombs through the mail in order to destroy the socialists. It's completely logical from top to bottom. So, but the Catholic Church, by tying authority to God, by tying Henry VIII to the church, it was Henry VIII's fault if he broke away. It wasn't the Catholic Church's fault. By tying Henry VIII to God, the Catholic Church would have protected and gone on protecting England. But the moment Henry VIII broke away from God, then it was simply a matter of time before his people turned on the king. And in 1649, the English cut off the head of their king, Charles I. And that was inevitable from the moment that Henry VIII broke away from God. When Henry VIII broke away from God, either the English people turned back to God, or eventually they cut his head off. And that happened in 1649. So, by tying authority to God, the Catholic, read paragraph 13, read all of it. The Catholic Church ennobles true obedience, because I'm no longer just obeying a man. If obedience is if authority is from God, then by obeying authority, I'm not just obeying a man, I'm obeying the power that is from God. And so obedience becomes something much nobler than just obeying another man. Americans tend to think of obedience, this is Jefferson again, they will tend to think, why should I obey another man? Answer, if he's only another man, you've got a very good question. But if he is the carrier of the authority of God, then you must obey that man because he is the carrier of the authority of God. That's why. So, she ennobles true obedience and she effectually bars tyranny. The Catholic Church doesn't just tell the people to pay, pray, and shut up. The Catholic Church also tells the priests and the bishops to behave. And what does the Catholic Church do, or what does the Lord God do if the priests and bishops and popes don't behave? The Lord God abandons them, and then what? Then where are those bishops when the Lord God abandons them? They're nowhere. That's just like the official churchmen today. They lose the people's respect, they lose everything. They're losing their churches, they're losing the buildings, they're losing money, they're losing the pedophilia suits. I mean, they're losing it all. So God has his own ways of controlling the churchmen if the churchmen misbehave. But if the churchmen would turn back to God and obey God, everything would drop back into place. And the Catholics would immediately start obeying their churchmen again and listening to their churchmen. I always quote the example of the 1984 election here in the United States, when there was a member of the female sex, I won't even call her a woman, running as vice president of the Democrats. I won't think of naming the name of this creature.
Starts with an F.
I won't think of naming the name of this creature. A lot of you remember. Cardinal O'Connor made one little statement. He said, I don't see how anybody can vote for somebody who's supported abortion. Wrong! All of the media, all over the country, absolutely up. The whole thing is like putting a match to a blazer. There's a blazer. Because one cardinal, one Catholic churchman had for one moment expressed the truth. Immediately it had a tremendous effect. If only the churchmen would tell the truth, they would immediately be listened to again. If they talk nonsense, they lose it. If they told the truth, they would get back all of their prestige and authority and power. It's as simple as that. So, notice 13, the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is not an enemy of liberty. The Catholic Church is a friend of authority, but she's not an enemy of liberty. She's the friend of true liberty, of rightly used liberty. The Catholic Church absolutely defends the right use of liberty. The Catholic Church is against the wrong use of natural liberty. But the Catholic Church is not against natural liberty. The Catholic Church is all for natural liberty being rightly used and turned into moral liberty. But the Masons say that she's against natural liberty. The Masons lie, as usual. Well, take, as usual, an hour of time of your own, and then we will continue at 11. We continue. We saw the layout of the truth on liberty in 3 to 13, because it's a difficult question. It's a difficult question because people's emotions are into it. It's very difficult to argue with emotion. And people today are completely emotionally into man being his own God and man being his own measure and man being free to do what he wants. And it's difficult to argue with that. And you have to start with the existence of God. You have to go back to the existence of God. And it's not any God. It's no use, because the liberty people think that they've got God in their system, which of course they have in a certain way. They think they make place for God. They think that, you know, I mean, the country is full of little churches. You go into Winona and there's a sort of church on every block, a different church on every block. We aren't against God. So, you know, we make place for God. So, but they don't make a place for the real God. If there's a different religion on every block, what kind of a God is that? And the problem is that he's a god. Those are a lot of little gods with a small g, and each of them is on a leash. And if I don't like this religion this week, well, I go down the block and pick up another religion next week. And if the pastor in that church, the minister, whoever he is, if I don't like him, if he says a nasty word to me or to my wife, well, I just go for another one down the block. I mean, I can change religion like I change shirts. Well, what God is that? It's not the God with a capital G, it's a lot of little mini gods with a small g, and I change one for the other just as I like. I'm in control. When there's a different church on every block, I'm in control. And if I'm in control, it's not the real God. Therefore, the system of religious liberty by which I think I make place for God, I'm not making place for the real God. I only make place for a lot of little gods, each of whom is on the leash, and each of whom I have got under control. And if he cuts across me in a way I don't like, well, I just go to the next one. That's not the real God. And therefore, the system of liberty, as it exists in many people's minds, doesn't have a place for the real God. The real God in this system is liberty, and liberty becomes a religion. And the real religion of these people, this is something that's difficult to understand, but the real religion of religious liberty people is religious liberty. You can see that in here's Catholicism as the real religion. And then what happens in religious liberty is that you get little Catholicism up on top Sunday morning, little Protestantism up on Sunday morning, little Mohammedanism up on Friday morning, whatever it is. But the real religion that all of these people share is liberty. What they really believe in for running their country, what they really believe in for organizing life is liberty. What unites them all is liberty. And so in a religious liberty situation, no one religion is allowed to be taken very seriously. And what happens on Sunday morning is just a little sort of sideshow. I mean, it's very nice, it makes me feel good, but I'm not allowed to take it so seriously that I'm going to get in a fight with anybody about it. We all agree to differ. In that case, the agreeing to differ is our real religion. And the Catholicism is simply a Sunday morning affair, just like Protestantism on Sunday morning. Hamish Fraser said a terrible thing a ways back. He said, American Catholics are Protestants who go to Mass. That's a terrible thing to say, but I'm afraid there's a lot of truth in it. What it means is this, that if American Catholics take their idea of religion from the culture which is all around them, and from everybody else's idea of religion which is all around them, they're going to get a wrong idea of religion.
What would be the timing of when he might have said that? I'm wondering, I mean, did he say it with the Novus Ordo Mass, or did you say it before?
Oh, no, I think he said it before.
Before that?
Oh, yes, I think so, yes. Yes.
He died fairly recently.
Hamish Fraser died about 8-10 years ago. Relatively recently, yes. Yeah.
But you think it was a traditional mass that exists?
I think so. I think so, yes. It's a tough thing to say. It's a hard saying. But there's truth in it. Because I was saying yesterday, Lincoln realized that to hold the nation together, a nation needs a religion to hold it together. And since Americans all have different religions, then to hold the American nation together, we will have to make some kind of religion out of what we are all agreed upon, which is the Founding Fathers. I ought to get that Lyceum speech for it. We've got it in the library there, and it's a speech he made around 1840, well before he became president, He was thinking about the country, and that's what he was thinking. And this is what's liable to happen. The real religion, what is really a person's religion? Is it what he does on Sunday morning, or is it what he leads his whole life and what he believes in his whole nation leading its life? What he believes in his whole nation leading its life by? If your answer is the second, then there's no question that the religion that holds together Americans is religious liberty. And unfortunately, it's the religion that takes over from many American Catholics. They don't understand just what demands Catholicism makes. Instead of slotting America into their Catholicism, they slot their Catholicism into America. And that's a very different ballgame. And that's what the Birches do. That's what the Birches are liable to do, for instance. So, what Vatican II is doing, what Vatican II did with that document is to slot the church into modern man's idea of the dignity of man and liberty, the dignity and liberty of man. It's adapting the church to the world, adapting the church to this idea of liberty which everybody has, thanks to the Freemasons. That's the problem. And it's just not Catholicism. People think that if they go to what's called a Catholic church on Sunday morning, then they're Catholics. Or they think that if they go to the traditional Mass on Sunday morning, then they're Catholics. Not necessarily. And Ratzinger is an American Catholic in the sense that Cardinal Ratzinger is now saying to the traditional Catholics, look, you want your traditional Mass on Sunday morning? Fine. We'll give you an indult. And over in Europe, they're talking about a deal coming up. The Holy Father is going to visit France, and he's going to, there's rumors of his making an offer to the traditionalists. Look, we'll give you all the Mass you want on Sunday morning. But just so long as you've got the traditional Mass with small letters up on top of a basis of liberty, which will keep us all happy and united and swinging together. We're all mushing together in a nice live and let live, agree to disagree situation. Well, a Catholic can't, he may in fact live in a let's all agree to diver, mushy together situation, but he can't accept it in principle. He can't accept it in principle, whereas what instinctively, Americans, for instance, and it's not only now Americans, but Americans were built on that principle of let's mush together and not worry too much about religion. Religion is simply what each of us gets up to on his own block on Sunday morning. Each of us has got a different block. Each of us has got a different religion. But that's only Sunday morning, so we're not going to really worry about it. We're not going to get into fights about it. When it really comes to hanging together, we're going to hang together behind Washington, Lincoln, Jefferson, and so on. And that's what we're really going to live by. In that case, you know, the real religion is not what they do on Sunday morning. Religion is what men live by, not what they simply get up to on Sunday morning. Tony.
Well, I was just going to say, that's the situation now. The way it is and everything practically that you deal with, you have to sort of live and let live.
Well,
unfortunately.
You do have to live and let live. Yes, of course, it's common sense. I mean, St. Peter had to live and let live. Peter couldn't take out a UK-47 or an AK-47 and go around Rome spraying all the people that weren't Catholics. That just didn't work. It's not the way to convert souls. But to live and let live is one thing. To build it up as a principle, that's quite another. To accept it as a fact, a necessary fact, is one thing. But to turn the fact into a principle is quite another. And that's the whole drama from the Peace of Westphalia to the French Revolution. It turned from the fact into the principle. And if you're living with the fact, there's a strong pressure to accept it as a principle. And that's what the Pope is now doing. The Pope is now accepting it as a principle. I mean, for a long time, Catholics have lived under pressure all over the world, if you like, under pressure from the modern world. But until Pope Pius XII, they never agreed that this was the ideal situation. Right? But a modern Pope would glorify the Peace of Westphalia. He'd said there's nothing wrong with that at all. But the Pope at the time said this is not good news. Because it's a fact which is liable to slide into the principle, if you could keep it as a fact. But the environment works on us. He said the other did the zeitgeist.
Well, you have to constantly regard.
Yes.
To be drawn into.
You have to constantly resist. And what you have to resist is this mentality that liberty is great, liberty is what life is about, liberty is the glory of man, liberty is the best basis on which to construct society. This is what so many people today think. It's a deep emotion, and to argue with that, or to get to grips with that, it's very difficult. And so with Vatican II, the churchmen gave up fighting it, and they decided to join what they couldn't lick. They couldn't lick, they decided that they could no longer lick or even try to lick the modern world, so they decided to join it. So we're going to join in the mushy liberty world.
Or it had been emotionally already so absorbing so much that they didn't even consciously concede something. They were already so...
The churchmen were into it, yes.
With the modern
yes.
That they couldn't distinguish anymore.
Yes. And you have to really stop and think to realize just how much your emotions have slid and what your emotions are really putting forward. You have to stop and think, and then think why it's wrong. And but to argue, to try to argue with most people about liberty is like fighting fog. It's like taking a sword and trying to fight fog. I mean, you can, yes, and then you find the fog inside yourself too.
Because they are the same ones who tolerate everything.
We're all. It doesn't mean that, you know, when you get out of here, or when we immediately got to start punching Protestants on the nose. I mean, that's not.
Can't do that.
You know, our Lord told Peter to put up his sword because it wasn't the way to men's hearts. But we have, you know, this question is so difficult because people are unconsciously so emotionally into liberty that they can't think straight. It's just an automatic thing. Just like, you know, either conservatives or liberals, when they're faced with the Unabomber's argument, they can't begin to handle it because they just automatically assume that modern technological society is wonderful. It's more wonderful than any society there's been before. How can you possibly question industrial technology? It's absurd. The man is just absurd. And that's the conservatives or the liberals will say that.
Would it make sense to say to them, look, we cannot agree on against ecumenical movements because that's impossible, but as long as you say you're Christians and we are Christians, let's define what the devil is, and let's agree on a program to fight the devil.
It's very difficult for Catholics to work with any other religion. Very difficult. The question was asked to Pius X about German trade unions back in 1912. And the argument was, should German Catholics cooperate with German Protestants in trade unions? And I think Pius XII's answer was, for a very limited time, for a very limited purpose. But Catholics have such different views that, you know, you're not really trying to do the same thing. For instance, if Catholics get into the fight against abortion with non-Catholics, non-Catholics and Catholics are really trying to do quite different things. The non-Catholics will simply be just defending human life. The Catholics are thinking of the sacraments, of baptism, of eternal life. You're really in two different ballparks.
The words have different meanings.
Yes, and therefore it's very difficult, and it's dangerous, because if you start working alongside them, you're liable to start picking up their ideas, especially if they're in the majority. And if they are decent-looking citizens, if they look as though they behave themselves decently, as I say, the temptation is to say, well, he mows his lawn well, and he pays his taxes just like me, and he plays a good game of golf, he's just as good a guy as I am. That's the temptation. And it's easy to slip into. So, but in other words, what I'm trying to say is that how can I say, there's been a landslide over the last 200 years. Over the last 200 years, there's been a landslide in the bottom of people's minds, and so to try to plant Catholic ideas on the bottom on this landslide is very difficult. It's like trying to pile drive. You've got to pile drive piles through layers of slippery mud until you start hitting rock again. It's difficult to hit rock in the minds of people who live in a religious liberty culture, which is our culture today. It's difficult to hit rock. Because people's minds just have no, they have, in a religious liberty environment, in a religious liberty culture, the rock is very difficult to reach. People are accustomed to building their minds on mud, to building their lives on mud. They found everything on mud. And to get through to rock is difficult. So, but Pope Leo is trying. So let's have a look now at false liberty, which runs from 15 to 35. As you can see, it's in 3 sections. False liberty in general, then false liberties in particular, liberty of worship. Notice again, he's starting with liberty of religion. That's the biggest culprit. Liberty of speech, 23. He goes into liberty of teaching here, which is interesting, and finally liberty of conscience. And then there's a final, very important section on toleration, the Catholic doctrine of tolerance or toleration, which is 32 to 35. And that's very important, because the Catholic Church does teach toleration, but toleration in fact, not toleration in principle, which is completely different. There's a world of difference between tolerating non-Catholics in fact, which is sheer common sense, and then tolerating them in principle, which is to deny God. Admitting that your fellow men have a right not to be Catholics is to slap God in the eye, is to spit in God's eye. To say that your fellow men have a right to abandon the true religion or to go nowhere near the true religion of God is to say that God is not the true God. Is to cut God right down and to build man right up. My fellow men have a right to spit in God's eye. Who does that leave God to be? No man has a right to spit in God's eye. No man has a right not to be a Catholic. Every man has a right to be a Catholic and a duty to be a Catholic. No man has a right not to be a Catholic. You may tolerate his not being a Catholic because you can't do anything else, and it's common sense. And to kill him or punch him or abuse him because he's not a Catholic is not the way to make him into a Catholic. It's not exactly apostolic to go and punch somebody on the nose.
In other words, you can't say live and let die.
So, no, you can't say live and let die. Much as we might like to exterminate all non-Catholics, it's simply not, it's obviously not what God wants. You know? I mean, it's common sense. But then you see the Masons turn around and say, so you think everybody ought to be Catholics, then you want to persecute everybody who isn't Catholic. See, they immediately exaggerate in the opposite direction. No, you don't want to persecute everybody who's not Catholic. But according to circumstances and according to situations and according to what people understand, they must be told that they do, wisely and prudently, they must all be told that they do not have a right not to be Catholics. That's what they've got to be told. How soon you tell them depends on a lot of circumstances. And if there are enough Catholics in a society, then the point comes where the leaders of that society have a duty to exercise Catholic censorship in order to protect souls from pornography, for instance, and save them from falling into hell. The leaders have a duty, the politicians, if you like, have a duty, be they presidents, be they kings. They have a duty, if enough people in the society are Catholic to understand what's going on, they have a duty to exercise Catholic censorship, as Gregory XVI said. The church has a right to censor because the church is the truth. The communists do not have a right to censor because they do not have the truth. They think they have the truth, and therefore, logically, they think they have a right to censor. But we as Catholics know that they don't have the truth. How do I know that Catholicism is the truth? Hey, well, we need to go through all of our Catholic apologetics again. But the Catholicism is that every other religion on some point or other contradicts Catholicism. Therefore, if Catholicism is the truth, every other religion is on some point wrong. And if the other religions are not wrong, well, then I must find the religion which is the complete truth. And in that case, I ought to go whichever religion was the complete truth. If you say that no religion is the complete truth, then I go back to Catholic apologetics and will prove that God exists, that Jesus Christ is God, and that he founded only one church. And that church is recognizable, and therefore all of us has a duty to belong to it. That's Catholic apologetics. And the Catholics have all the arguments. When it comes to arguing, the Catholics have the guns. The Protestants don't, the Mohammedans don't, the Jews don't, none of the others have, because the truth, the Catholic religion is the truth. That's what gives it the right to say everybody else ought to be Catholic, because it's the truth. And everybody else who isn't Catholic is into some lie. People have difficulty today understanding that. So, there is a Catholic doctrine of tolerance, we'll come to it. Catholic, the false liberty in general, 15, 16, 17, 18. 15, in capital letters, human reason is sovereign. In other words, reason rules. Man is God, if you like. Man answers and is subject to nobody. Man answers and is subject to nobody. In other words, 15, man is God. That's what that means. That's absolute radical rationalism. Rationalism is closely connected to liberalism. Liberalism is the exaggeration of liberty. Rationalism is the exaggeration of reason. Naturalism is the exaggeration of nature. And all three are connected, and all three ultimately mean man is God. As for the state, you apply that to the state. In that case, if man is God, then pleasure is morality, meaning anything I like to do, it's right to do. Whatever I take into my head to do is right. Pleasure is morality. My pleasure is what makes right and wrong. Right and wrong goes by what pleases me. Pleasure is morality. The majority makes the law. If most people, the law of a society will be set up by what most people in that society think, because man is God, and revolution is everywhere. The effect of this doctrine is that you've just got revolution, you spread revolution everywhere. Each of these sentences that you read here is obviously just a very short summary of a whole paragraph of the Pope's argument, and you must read the Pope's own argument. That's radical rationalism. Now that's pretty blatant. It's pretty crass. Therefore, what you often meet with is a more moderate version of it, which is more appealing because it's less extremist, if you like, it's less radical. Which is the more dangerous, the radical rationalism or the moderate rationalism? The moderate is the more dangerous, yes, because it looks more like the truth. So it's not less dangerous because it's more moderate. On the contrary, it can be more dangerous because it's more moderate. In any case, this is the moderate form, and this is very much the United States. To accept God's natural law, but to refuse his revealed law, is still to throw off God. And to subject the individual, but to exempt the state from obeying God, is likewise absurd. What's the Pope arguing here? See, the extreme position is that man is God, and there is no law at all that applies to man. A less extreme position is, well, we accept the natural law, and this was the founding fathers, more or less. We accept the natural law. There is a natural law. We have certain inalienable rights given to us by our Creator. But we don't accept the Catholic law. The law of nature, yes. The law of the Catholic Church, no. And the Holy Father says that's unacceptable. Now, that's definitely more moderate. The extremist said, neither natural law, nor Catholic, nor no law at all. I am my own law. I will do as I like. That's what the extremist said. The moderate says, we accept natural law. It's just Catholic law that we don't want. Now, you remember what he said in the encyclical on Freemasonry. He said that if you undo the first stitch, all of the other stitches come undone. And if you accept natural law but reject Catholic law, eventually natural law comes undone. That's exactly what's happening in the American schools today. The American Civil Liberties Union fights all these lawsuits to stop God even being mentioned in the public schools. And that is actually logical. With the First Amendment, that's logical. There's logic on their side. If by the First Amendment you say the state will not recognize any one religion, as a state. The state as a state will recognize no one religion, but will be open, will leave freedom for all. In that case, you're saying that the state doesn't worry about truth. If the state, which is the embodiment of our collectivity, our collective intelligence and our collective will, doesn't worry about truth, why should any of us worry about truth? From the state, it will rub off onto every member of the state. Therefore, truth doesn't matter, religion doesn't matter, God doesn't matter. If God doesn't matter, it's a waste of time to teach him in the schools. And so from the 20th stitch back to the first stitch, if you refuse to acknowledge God in the state, or the true God in the state, if the state refuses to acknowledge the true God, it's simply a matter of time before the very name of God will be forbidden in the public schools. It's logical. And that's exactly what Leo XIII is saying here. To accept God's natural law but to refuse his revealed law is still to throw off God, because you're throwing out his Catholic Church. You're taking half of God and refusing the other half. You're taking the natural half, but you're refusing the Catholic half. God doesn't work by halves. And if you throw out half of him, you throw out the whole of him. You can't do that. Therefore, to try to build a state on the natural law while refusing the Catholic Church, to separate the state from the Catholic Church, but in principle, as a principle, is absurd, he says, and it's going to lead to disaster. To subject another form is to subject the individual, but to exempt the state from obeying God is likewise absurd. Let's have a look at 17 and 18, because they're very much the American compromise, the United States compromise. There are indeed some adherents of liberalism who do not subscribe to these opinions, which we have seen to be fearful in their enormity. That's the extremism. Paragraph 17. In the Grey edition, have you got some adherents of liberalism who do not subscribe to these opinions? Whereabouts was that in the Grey edition?
147.
Page 147? Okay, well done. Openly opposed to the truth, the cause of mystery. Indeed, very many amongst the extremists, compelled by the force of truth, do not hesitate to admit that such extreme liberty, no God at all, is vicious. It's simple license, whenever intemperate in his claims to the neglect of truth and justice. And therefore, these moderates would have liberty ruled and directed by right reason and consequently subject to the eternal law and to the divine law. But here they think they may stop, holding that man as a free being is bound by no law of God except such as God makes known to us through our natural reason. In other words, we accept the natural law, but we refuse any revealed law or Catholic law. In this they are plainly inconsistent. So the Pope is arguing that the founding fathers, the American founding fathers, for instance, who attempted to take a stand on natural law while refusing Catholic law, were inconsistent. Here's how he argues it. For if, as these moderates must admit, and no one can rightly deny, if the will of the divine lawgiver, or God, is to be obeyed, because every man is under the power of God, and tends towards God as his end, it follows that no one can set limits to the authority of this law-giving God. How dare we say, "O lawgiver, I accept half of your law, but not the other half"? If they do so, they fail in the obedience which is due. Indeed, if the human mind is so presumptuous as to define the nature and extent of God's rights and its own duties, then reverence for the divine law will be apparent rather than real. And that's why the founding fathers were not really Christians. People say they were, but they weren't. Or they were completely inconsistent and illogical Christians. But they had essentially cut the ground from underneath God with their refusal of, with their separation of church and state. And with their First Amendment, they had kneecapped the Lord God. And they put a leash around his neck, and he had to do obediently what they told him to do. In other words, by the American Constitution, man is God and no longer God is God. That's the Catholic understanding. Arbitrary judgment will prevail over the authority and providence of God. Man must therefore take his standard of a loyal and religious life from the eternal law and from all and every one of those laws which God, in his infinite wisdom and power, has been pleased to enact and to make known to us by such clear and unmistakable signs through his Catholic Church as to leave no room for doubt. Jefferson will argue that it's not clear to him that the Catholic Church is the one true church. A Catholic replies, Jefferson easily has enough intelligence, and God has easily given him enough evidence for him to see that the Catholic Church is the true church if he wants to. If he doesn't see it, it's because he doesn't want to. That's very often the case, especially with intelligent men, especially in positions of leadership, because in positions of leadership, God will be giving them the graces to see what they ought to be seeing. And if they don't see it, it's because they don't. If they don't see it, it's because they don't want to see it. And the more so because laws of this kind have the same author, the same origin as the eternal law, and are absolutely in accordance with right reason and perfect the natural law. He's talking there about Catholic law, what the Catholic Church teaches. It's entirely in line with natural law. It comes from the same source as the natural law. It's the same God. There aren't two real gods. There's not the one true God and then the Catholic God. The one true God is the Catholic God. The God as Catholics understand him. These laws embody the government of God, who graciously guides and directs both the intellect and the will of man, lest these fall into error. Let then that continue to remain in a holy and inviolable union, which neither can nor should be separated, namely the natural law and the law of the Catholic Church. And the state must, to the extent that it is prudent and possible, stand behind Catholic law as well as the natural law. If a state has a whole lot of non-Catholics, then there's a limit to what it can do, because it won't help the Catholic Church by ramming Catholicism down the people's throats, because the people will react. Therefore, in the name of prudence, the state has the right to be careful about how it promotes Catholicism. But that doesn't change the fact that it has, within prudence, an absolute duty to promote Catholicism. And that's what people today deny. In all things, for this is the dictate of right reason itself, let God be dutifully and obediently served. So notice 17. Notice also 18. There are others, somewhat more moderate, though not more consistent, who affirm. This is very much the United States. If you as an individual want to be a Catholic, fine, but the state is not going to be Catholic. We can't have a Catholic state. That's the position of many people. Well, the Pope says it won't fly. Somewhat more moderate, although not more consistent, who affirm that the morality of individuals is to be guided by the divine law, but not the morality of the state. So that in public affairs, the commands of God may be passed over and may be entirely disregarded in the framing of laws. That's these Catholic politicians from Massachusetts who keep saying, in my private life, I'm absolutely against abortion, but as an official of the American state, I take no position because there's separation of church and state. So, you know, as a poor, dumb individual on Sunday morning, I mean, I get down on my knees and I obey God, but as an official of we don't obey God. Well, we don't need to obey God. I'm making fun, of course, but that's the position they take, and it's completely inconsistent. If God is the God of the individual on Sunday morning, he's also God of the state from Monday through Friday. And if he isn't God of the state from Monday through Friday, then he's not God of the individual, he's just a pussycat on Sunday morning. There's no way that a God who is not the God of the state from Monday to Friday is the real God on Sunday morning. No way. In public affairs, the commands of God may be passed over and may be entirely disregarded in the framing of laws. Hence follows the fatal theory of the need of separation between church and state. But the absurdity of the separation of church and state is manifest. Nature herself proclaims the necessity of the state providing means and opportunities whereby the community may be enabled to live properly, that is to say, according to the laws of God. Because since God is the source of all goodness and justice, it is absolutely ridiculous that the state should pay no attention to these laws or render them abortive by, in other words, futile, by contrary enactments. Besides, those who are in authority owe it to the Commonwealth not only to provide for its external well-being and the conveniences of life and others' material prosperity, but still more to consult the welfare of men's souls by the laws they pass. But for the increase of such benefits, nothing more suitable can be conceived in order to make sure that people save their souls. Nothing is more helpful than the laws that God has made for his Catholic Church. And therefore, they who in their government of the state take no account of God's laws abuse political power by causing it to deviate from his proper end and from what nature itself prescribes. And what is still more important, here's a third argument, and what we have more than once pointed out, although the civil authority has not the same proximate end as the spiritual, nor proceeds on the same lines, nevertheless, in the exercise of their separate powers, they must occasionally meet. For instance, in the question of abortion. It's a question of the state law and a question of God's law. For their subjects are the same, and not infrequently they deal with the same objects, and though in different ways. Whenever this occurs, since a state of conflict is absurd and manifestly repugnant to the wise ordering by God, there must necessarily exist some order or mode of procedure to remove the problems between the two and to guarantee harmony. The harmony between church and state has been suitably compared to the harmony between body and soul for the well-being of both. So the state, if the state disregards the law of God, even if the individuals observe the law of God, if the state disregards the law of God, it's going to be a disaster for the individuals. The individuals, like for instance, here's a good man and a good woman who want to marry until death do them part. Fine. But if the state says that at any moment either can walk away with no problem, there's no fault divorce, then there's nothing that either of those two can do to defend their marriage against that thing by the state. I mean, when they get married, they love one another very dearly, and it lasts 3 months. And they don't dream of separating. But down the pike, who knows? But if the state makes laws, so the individuals may be very good individuals, they absolutely believe in indissoluble marriage, but if the state makes laws which make it absolutely easy for one or the other to walk away, there's nothing, the marriage is automatically fragile. With the best will in the world on the part of the two people involved, the marriage is automatically fragilized by the state laws. Therefore, if the individual observes God's law, that's not enough. The individual needs the backing of the state to help observe God's law. And if the state, by its wickedness, undermines the individual observing the law, it's going to be that much more difficult for the individuals to observe the law. Doctor?
And the people who I see who have been divorced, or who I see go through divorces, some of them are known as sort of Catholics.
Yes.
They're in St. Mary's. And they have the same mentality as your Massachusetts politicians, though, as far as their Sunday morning, they know the divorce is wrong, but Monday through Friday, they got to go with their old lady to deal with that.
Yes.
And so it's the same mentality.
Yes.
And so they don't even want to hold their marriage together.
Yes.
And so the state doesn't prohibit it, it makes it that much easier.
Yes.
But the couples who are trying to hold their marriages together and who try to live their Catholic faith Sunday to Sunday,
yes,
all through the week, they have a better chance. And the couples who have the Catholic politicians mentality, they don't like it.
Yes. Yeah. It's just two completely different ball games. And what the Holy Father is saying is here is that there's the half and half, no half and half romance will do. With me, it's all or nothing. With God, it's all or nothing. I must find the words of that little song and then sing it, because it's absolutely the law of God. With God, no half and half will do. So, you know, the extreme liberals kick God out completely. The moderate liberals only half kick out God, which looks better and is more dangerous. But half and half kicking out God is just as bad as kicking him out altogether. That's what the Pope is arguing, and of course he's right. With Catholicism, it's everything or nothing. And it's Satan who says, well, God will be, as long as you're just individuals, good guys, then it doesn't matter what the state gets up to. Or, you know, as long as you observe the natural law, then it doesn't matter so much about the Catholic law. You know, with God, it's all or nothing. So, notice 17 and 18, because that moderate liberalism is very common today. You might say it's much more common than radical liberalism. Liberalism, rationalism, it's the same thing, basically. Although, as I say, one is the exaggeration of liberty, the other is the exaggeration of reason. It's very common, and it enables people to mix God and the world. Well, you can't do it, you know. God doesn't allow of any mixture. So, we move on to the false liberties in particular. And Gregory XVI, you may remember, said that all of these liberties are false, but he didn't go into it to argue. He simply said, this is a horror, this is a disaster, this is a catastrophe, this is a misery, but he didn't really argue it. Here, Leo XIII is arguing the case. In detail, when we go from the general picture of extreme liberalism and then moderate liberalism, or half and half liberalism, which is in fact just as bad and more dangerous than extreme liberalism, then we come to, in detail, liberty of worship, quote unquote, means that a man may profess any religion or no religion just as he likes. And that's what people understand liberty of worship to mean, or religious liberty to mean. But the truth of the matter, 20, is that all men must profess whatever religion the one true God has recognizably laid down. And you argue from miracles, you argue from the history of the church. The Catholic argues from all of the Catholic miracles and from the Catholic history of the church, the example of the Catholic saints, the example of the spreading, the incredible spreading of the Catholic religion all over the world. The Catholic argues that it is recognizable for anyone of goodwill. It's recognizable that the Catholic Church is the one true church. Today, the counter-argument is, but the state can't tell which is the true religion. It's not the state's business to tell which is the true religion. The state's business is just to lay down the drains and provide an air force. Is that a valid argument? David? No, it isn't. Why not?
Well, I mean, the state is no more than a collection of the individuals.
Exactly.
The individuals are bound to recognize God, and the state must be.
Exactly. Exactly. The state is no more than a bunch of individuals, or the collectivity of individuals, in particular the leaders. Each of those leaders is a man who can recognize. Therefore, the state can recognize. It's perfectly capable of recognizing. It can recognize. Has it got a duty then to submit to the one true God that it recognizes? Has the state got a duty to, as state, to submit to the one true God that it is then capable of recognizing? Yes, it has. How could it not have? It's important to see what the state is. Imagine here are a lot of human beings, little blobs like that, and in each of those human beings there's like a blue has disappeared. Oh, there it is. There's like a social dimension. It's important to realize what society is like, what society is. In human nature is sociality. Every human being, as a human being, is a social creature. Aristotle said it by saying, man is a social animal. That means that man naturally lives in society. Take an example, a very simple example. You've got a 3-acre field. You put 4 boys in each corner of the field, and then you let them loose. What's happened within 5 minutes? They've all come together. Or they've seen one another. All the 4 boys have immediately got together. What's happened in another 3 minutes? Hierarchy. One of the boys is the leader, right? They won't fighting within 3 minutes. They'll be fighting within another 10 minutes. But very soon, the first thing that happens as these 4 boys come together is that one of them immediately becomes the leader, right? And says, okay, we're going to play in that corner, or rather than play in this corner. One immediately becomes leader. That's simply one little example of the fact that human individuals are not just individual by nature, they are also social by nature. So all of these little individual brown blobs have a blue sociality. So that when the individuals come together, what immediately happens when the individuals come together, the sociality forms into a society. The society is the big blue ring, so to speak, made by the joining of the sociality in each of the little brown rings, right? Each individual brings his own sociality. I mean, if I'm playing a game of chess, for a moment, my sociality and his sociality, we make a little society of 2 for the duration of the game of chess. If we're in a village, our socialities are joining together about 200. If we're in a nation, our socialities are joining 250 million. That's less real and less obvious. But in any case, society is not something different from or independent of human nature. Society is something that naturally arises from and with human nature. If then God is the author of human nature, then God is also the author of society. And if God has rights over human nature, God has rights over society. And if human nature has duties to God, then society has duties to God. And to God must go not only the worship of the little brown rings in each of their little homes, but to God must also go the social worship of the society. And that's what used to happen in Catholic nations. The Parliament would meet in the cathedral, all of the ministers would be there in the cathedral, and the president would carry the cross. Garcia Moreno would take part in the Good Friday procession as president with his ribbons and with his medals, carrying the cross, to give an example of the president as president obeying God's law. And that's entirely normal and it's completely Catholic. It's practically unthinkable in a modern state, but that is the Catholic way. And it's logical, completely logical. Therefore, the state as state owes obedience to God, as well as the individual as individual owing obedience to God. So a man may not profess any religion as he likes. All men must profess whatever religion God has recognizably laid down, and therefore it follows 21:22 that the state also, coming from God, because the blue ring comes from God, just as the little brown rings come from God, because the blue ring is the putting together of, the putting in order and putting in shape of that part of all of the little brown rings. So it still comes from God, and therefore it owes to God. The state, too, coming from God, must profess the recognizably true religion. Whew. Go and tell the English House of Commons that they must recognize the one true God and they all got to be Catholics. Whew. They won't like it. They'll all start singing God Save the Queen, and they'll...
The Irish are trying to do it in Belfast.
They'll crank up the gallows on Tyburn again, and they'll have you hanged, drawn, and quartered all over again. I mean, it won't, what the Pope is saying won't fly today. But the question is not whether it will fly or not, the question is whether it's true. If it's true, men must still be told what the truth is. Whether they obey it or not is up to them, but they must be told. The state coming from God must profess the recognizably true religion, which there is one recognizably true religion, and that's the Catholic religion, because liberty of worship is as harmful to the state as the true religion is helpful to it. Liberty of religion means freedom for pornography and the ruination of my children, the potential ruination of my children. Again, I may run a very good home, I may have a very good home, but if I let my children out of the front door, they're going to go past that store where all of that filth is laid out by the rackful, In order, the family can't do it on its own. The family needs, in order to bring up children, the family needs the support of the state. And if the family is Catholic and the state isn't, the family's in deep doo-doo. Because the boy walks out of the front door, and if he's got $2 in his pocket, he goes down to the video store. What does he get there? It's incredible, this position that we've now got, of these video stores freely open to youngsters to pick up just any filth they like, virtually speaking. In the old days, you'd never have seen that. I always say, and I'm sure it's true, in the old days, if anybody had tried to bring into a village or a town that kind of stuff, the men of the village would have got together with horsewhips to thrash that kind of character out of town. They would have whipped him out of town, because the dads would know what damage that can do to their children, especially the boys, that kind of thing. But today, if any male tried to whip the pornographers out of town, there'd be lawsuits, he couldn't possibly. So that's liberty of worship being so harmful to the state. On the contrary, true religion is helpful to the state, because if the state enforces the true religion, if the state enforces proper censorship of all of the video stores and all of the libraries, then I can let my boy freely out, then my boy is free to roam, and then the state backs the decent families and supports the decent families. At the moment, the state is supporting the disintegration of the family. It's very, very clear.
Isn't that liberty of what store I go to?
Well, it's always in the name of liberty.
Oh, yeah?
Of course, as you say, people today don't think. You just push on the liberty button and everybody feels good, and then you push on the censorship button and they all start hissing and spitting. Censorship is the greatest evil of all, you might think. No, it isn't. As long as Catholic censorship is a great blessing. People don't think that way, but this is our religion. And there's no compromise there's no half and half compromise with liberalism. Well, we'll continue this afternoon.